We are on our third language acquisition. Yeah, you heard it. We're on our third language acquisition, and it's not something to brag about, but it's something I'm proud about because learning takes a lot of discipline. Yep, learning takes a lot of discipline. Now, I know for the younger generation, many people think, why do we need to learn a new language when there are a lot of translator apps, when there are a lot of, you know, when the world is globally becoming an English world thanks to social media, thanks to the new advancement in technology. But then, if you think that, ask yourself, why are we having more and more language apps? That's the question. Because language is an integral part of human culture, it is an integral part of who we are. It's a cultural marker. It says a lot about who we are, how we figure things out, how we think about ourselves. For example, take this. In English language, we say, how old are you? Because the concept of existence is thought about in that way in that language. So the longer you stay on earth, the older you are said to be, right? So you hear things like the baby is 2 days old, whereas in essence, that child is not old. But that is how we figure out or we think about existence on earth. Whereas if you come to the Romance language, the question of your existence is asked by how many years you've earned or you have, is thought of in the sense of possessions. And so we say, quel âge as-tu? How many, what age have you? Or in Spanish, we say, ¿cuántos años tienen? Translating literally as how many years do you have? Because it is thought that possessing time is a commodity that we own and that we have. So that when you say, I have 10 years old, then you will describe yourself either as a 25 years or as a 100-year person if you feel old or not. But in English language, we think of our existence as an aging process. Like the moment you're born, you begin to get old, you see. So that brings us to why languages are very, very important and why they will never go away. Why is one of the reasons why a language is a cultural marker and why you should learn it. Personally, one of the best things that have happened to me was coming to live in Ecuador and learning Spanish because I had to live in Spanish. Mandela, and I think I've said this in another video, Nelson Mandela of South Africa said something. He said, when you speak to a man in a language he understands, you're speaking to his head, you speak to the intellect because he understands and he can translate. But when you speak to a man in his own language, you're speaking to his heart. That is because you are identifying with his culture, you are identifying with who he is. So imagine, for example, me being in Ecuador and I go out to the market and then I say, how are you? You know, hello, chickle play, welcome, you know. And the person may or may not understand English or they may get the idea that I don't speak Spanish. But imagine if I made the effort and I say buenos dias. Even if I don't pronounce it well and I say buenos dias because we don't have the long I in English, you know, but that endears me immediately to the seller or to whoever is the Spanish person may be at that moment, you see. So language acquisition is actually a good way of bonding with people from different parts of the world. You know, some people spend years and they don't learn a language, they think it's not beneficial for them. Uh, Maybe you learn one, maybe you are learning English. I have had the privilege of teaching a couple of people here English language, you know, but we're talking about the real benefits today of learning a new language and how to choose the right one. So, for example, if you speak English, what language do you go from there? Do you learn French? Which, although the grammatical rules seem to be very, very diverse, they are intertwined actually, because English was not this rich language it is today, neither was it a dominant one until the arrival of the Normans in England, and they literally, I would say, had a very big role to play in developing what is called English language today. So if you speak French or you speak English, you can learn one or the other because there are so many words. The only thing I would say is that the grammar is different. You know, for example, we have hospital, hôpital, governor, gouverneur, chef is chef. You have le judiciaire, judiciary. You have entrepreneur. That is an English word, you know, is a French word rather, but we use it in English today. We have things like social, social. The difference is just the pronunciation, right? So let's begin with what really happens to your brain when you begin to learn English language. Now, generally, the brain is a very, very fantastic organ that many scientists have likened to a muscle. By that they mean the more you train it, the more efficient it becomes. And today, most people, if you don't know, we have what is called neuroplasticity. Plasticity, meaning that whatever you learn, your brain has to form neural pathways. So you are actually doing yourself and your brain a favor when you learn another language, you know, because when you learn a language, you are not just memorizing vocabulary, you are building new neural pathways. Research has shown that bilingual people often have stronger memory, better multitasking skills, and improved concentration. For example, as I'm talking to you now, I'm thinking a lot of people are looking at me and probably are Spanish speakers, and some of them who are listening to me right now and can speak English are trying to do two things. So the first thing is that you concentrate, sorry, and you're able to multitask, because what multilinguals or bilinguals are doing right now, if you're listening to me, is that you're searching for words, especially if you are maybe at the initial phase. Thank you very much. Gracias. So what is happening to you right now is that you're searching for words in Spanish. What is she trying to say? What does this word mean? What does that word mean? So basically, you're teaching your brain that, you're teaching your brain how to multitask, and that helps memory, because when you learn to retain, so that the next time you will have need of that word, it pops out. So that is the first three things that you are doing to your brain. You're making it more flexible. So think of it like what you do to the gym, in the gym, to your muscles. You are doing weight training. And the beautiful thing about language acquisition is that you are never too old to learn a language. One of my students is in her 60s and she's learning English, and she's speaking little by little. I started learning languages in my 40s. I know of another person who started learning in their 70s, because your brain is never old as long as you choose to train it, so that is the first benefit of learning. You are doing that. And there was another research I was reading that exercising your brain by learning a new skill, such as language, also helps you to fight what is called Alzheimer disease for the elderly, memory loss, which is what the bigger part of Alzheimer disease has, dementia. You keep your brain active. Okay, so number two reason why it's good to learn a language is not just about communicating. It's culture, it's humor, it's emotion, it expresses identity. I said that at the beginning. When you read Dante Alighieri in Italian, you are not just reading poetry. You feel the rhythm in a different way. And when you read Victor Hugo in French, you experience nuances that the translations don't fully capture. For example, when I was learning Spanish, I remember I was given a small booklet my friend gave me so that I could expand my vocabulary. It was titled La culpa es de la vaca, and it's a very beautiful anecdote of people's culture to say human mind never accepts blame. Okay, we always blame someone. So La culpa es de la vaca is, in summary, the story of someone who bought a handbag for his wife, and the wife found a hole, I think, in the handbag, and so she blames the husband. Why would he buy a sports bag? And the man says, it's not my fault, it's the seller. We go to the seller says, no, it's the supplier. The supplier says, no, it's the factory owner. The factory owner says, but it's not my fault, it's the person who sends the cow skin or the cow hide to me. And so when we get to the person who supplies the raw hide now for the bags to be made from, he says, it's not my fault. Go and blame the cow because the hide belongs to the cow. And it gives you an idea about people's culture, people's identity, right? So that is number three. And for me, I think you relate better with people. You're able to interact, you're able to socialize with people because you can understand their jokes, you can understand their pain. For example, in Spanish, we don't say sorry, we say lo siento, which for me, lo siento literally means I feel it. Translation, I feel the pain that I've caused you. And then they would apologize or say something like pido perdón or perdóname, because now they're acknowledging the distance. But in general, they normally don't say sorry like we say in English. They would say disculpa. So when you break disculpa into two, that culpa actually means guilt. So for my English mind, I would say, all right, my friend, take care, okay? Take care of yourself, brother Mantis. I'll see you later. It's a way of saying, don't blame me. So unblame me, disculpa, unblame me. And I noticed that studying a lot of people here in Ecuador where I live, they would always have an excuse or justification for an action than to just say sorry, because they are not going to take the blame. They don't assume the blame, and it shows in the words that they say sorry. So you get to understand people better and avoid unnecessary conflicts rather. All right. So number three, which I think for most young adults who are venturing out into the labor market, the world has become a global place, like I said at the beginning. You have companies like Airbnb, Amazon, Google operating at international level, Facebook, the fashion industry. So when you speak more than one language, is what you're doing for yourself is that you're expanding your job options. I've heard of people who got a job just because they had that one advantage over the other job seekers because they spoke that language. So when you, for example, you come to Ecuador as, let's say, a foreign company establishes itself here, even though they may come with a portion of staff that speaks English, their target market are Spanish speakers. So they would want someone who can work with the staff and at the same time interact with their market, with their clients, so to say. And so you who speaks more than one language, becomes the like, how can I put it? You become the the one-eyed man in the land in the land of the blind, so to speak. You have that added advantage, and it helps a lot because also your career can grow faster. So maybe you need in-house training, and you need to be sent to the head office of where your company comes from, and you speak the language of that place. Obviously, they would have no problem sending you there. So, for example, you work with what do I know? Let's say you work for Peugeot or you work for BMW, and you speak German. Tell me, who is going to go to BMW headquarters to learn further on the job so that you come back to get a promotion, you come back to get a bigger post in that company? It will be you, just because you speak German, not that because you're old or because you have more experience, probably not, but for the fact that it will be easier for the head office or the parent company to train you because of that added language. automatically you get the job, you see. So those are the advantages of um, having to choose a language. So now, how do you choose a language if you want to learn? So choosing strategically is key, and it is advisable to choose a language that sounds familiar to you. So languages like Spanish, Italian, French, while they all have vocabulary roots from Latin and Norman French that are in Latin, they all have a huge influence on English language, like I said. So that would be a good place to learn. Like I said before, for many people, they think their grammar rules may vary, but they are very similar languages and they have influenced English language a lot. So you could start off with Italian, you could start off with Spanish, you could start off with French, depending on where you're going to. So, for example, if you were thinking of going to Europe for further studies or for work, French would be a good place to start if you're in the banking sector. If you're in the fashion industry, arts, Italian would be a good place to go because a lot of major contribution in art and art history comes from Italy. Even our music, classical music today, what you call the opera, it comes from Italy. So you will do well to learn Italian. So those are things you can learn, like how does it figure into my career? How does it figure into my profession? For example, you're a chef and you want to go to be an international chef, you want to open an intercontinental restaurant, or you want to work in an intercontinental restaurant as a chef or as a cook, uh, learning one of those languages would be even more than that or more, would be to your advantage. So that is what makes Romance languages attractive option. And then choose by global influence. So, for example, Spanish is spoken across Latin America and crosses over into Spain. So it's a very widely spoken language. You have French that is even wider than Spanish because it's spoken in about three continents, in North America, in Canada, in Africa, spoken in Europe. So you have three continents. And even in the United States, like I said, North America, you have them in Canada and some parts of the US, which a lot of people ignore. Louisiana area, there are French speaking communities. So you choose by global influence. For example, Mandarin would be a very good one to go if you are a business person. Mandarin would be nice. It's the highest spoken language because of the population of the Chinese. But then the Chinese are also doing business in almost, if not all, continents of the world. It has huge global economic relevance. So think travel, think business, think trends in migration. For example, a lot of people are going back to Africa now to invest in Africa, and you have to learn either English or you have to learn French, if you don't speak this thing. And then lastly, if you love fashion, learn Italian. So you go by your passion. If you're very passionate about a certain language, not because it gives you a certain benefit, but you just fall in love with it, then by all means learn that language. In my case, Italian was my very first love. I don't think I've said it on this channel. I've shared it in my language channel. Someone borrowed me a novel once, and I just fell in love with the way this old man was cussing out someone in his language. The fact is, he was just speaking, he was expecting his emotion. But when I read what he was saying, it was beautiful because the author wrote the string of insults in Italian and then puts the translation in parentheses. So we're able to go with both languages, and I was completely sold because it didn't sound vulgar. And that's how I fell in love with Italian language. That is my passion. For work, for migration, I had to learn Spanish. Ahora hablo español, puedo dar clases en español. But then, if you speak French, so targeting my frères et sœurs en Afrique, à la francophonie, je me dirige à la francophonie si vous parlez anglais. English is your natural first choice. First of all, it's global and it shares vocabulary thanks to the Norman influence. It opens professional doors worldwide. Over 30% of English vocabulary comes from French. I've already said that. And if you're in Africa, it's funny, but we're surrounded by, we have a lot of English neighbors. I used to find it funny when I was growing up that many Nigerians, Ghanaians didn't speak French, but we shared borders with a lot of Francophone countries. That was weird, and I'm glad to see on the internet that that is gradually changing. So, if you speak French, another language that will be familiar, like I said, would be Italian or Spanish because they come from the same family. Portuguese also is another one, and it feels structurally intuitive because like I said, they share similar grammatical rules, verb conjugation, gender, sentence flow, so many similarities. So, si vous parlez français et que vous voulez apprendre une autre langue, je vous conseillerais d'apprendre tout premièrement l'anglais parce qu'il est global. Et de là, vous pouvez apprendre l'espagnol ou bien l'italien ou le portugais parce qu'on partage beaucoup de similarités parlant de les conjugaisons, la fluidité des sentences, des choses comme ça. And number three would be German or Dutch for strategic expansion. If a French speaker wants something different but still in Europe, German offers a lot of economic advantages. So linguistically, Dutch is close to English and German. So these sets of choices diversify skills. So back to my English people or English speakers rather. Germany is another one because it belongs to the same family with English language, whereas English shares a lot of influence with the Romantic languages. They're not from the same family, but those Romance languages have had a lot of influence on English language. So you see that, it varies. And then when we come to emotional and identity growth, many people don't talk a lot about this. When you discover a language, you discover another version of yourself. People feel softer when they speak Italian, they feel more direct in German. Many people say French is a romantic language. Uh, they feel more expressive in Spanish. So you get to learn about yourself. And that is one thing I love about Spanish. Spanish sounds very, very strong. Like there is a lot of emotions that do that. If you watch a lot of Spanish movies, you see, like when I was young, I used to watch a lot of movies from Mexico. The women, they are very, very emotional. Even the men, they have that expressiveness that we as Africans have. That is one thing I love about Español. Me encanta porque tiene emoción, da emoción cuando uno habla con gestos y que el tono, cuando uno grite, sabemos que está enojado, cuando sonriemos, está feliz. El español para mí es un idioma muy, muy emocional y me encanta porque como africanas somos también muy emocional, nos gustamos expresar las emociones a través de las palabras. Por ejemplo, me gusta cuando escucha a la persona decir, oye, oye, ¿qué pasa? ¿Cómo? ¿Qué dice, chica? Cosas así, o en la calle a veces, qué guapa, hola mi negra, things like that, they make it very, very interesting. Whereas with French, the French, is more like, a very diplomatic language. We don't really put a lot of emotion into it. And so you hear the very, very, very soft, very romantic. Bonjour, madame, comment ça va? Est-ce que je peux faire ceci pour vous? Vous appelez comment? Bonjour, je suis enchantée. Enchanted de vous reconnaître, enchanted de vous voir. Very soft things like that. English, on the other hand, is a bear of emotion, completely bare. Like to me, English is a business language, and that's why I think that the best English, in my opinion, is the one we speak in Africa because we coin our word, and I think that is why Nigerian English is gone global because we put a lot of nuances in the way we speak, so to say. I find it more interesting than the Queen's English, probably because I'm African, I'm Nigerian, I don't know. But that's the best English that shows, emotion. So language generally is not just practice, it's not just theory. Language is transformational. You will not remain the same when you learn a foreign language. For me, I have, through learning Spanish, learned a lot about Ecuador and Ecuadorians. And over time, I'm able to see how they behave, they behave, and the Spanish spoken here, how it's different from the Spanish spoken in España, Spain, you learn a lot about the people that way. It expands your brain, it expands your empathy. You begin to understand natural sounds that people don't have in their language. For example, with my students here, a lot of time I just smile inside when I hear someone say, "How are you?" And you ask, "How are you?" And say, "I'm very good," because in Spanish, V can be B, can be V, so those two letters are interchangeable. Whereas in English, V is V and B is B. So for the Spanish person, it's very hard. Another sound, that you hear is how are you, because they don't have the U sound, which I think in some words are represented with a double L, and you hear some people pronounce that as shu sound or as j sound, So uh, it's interesting. You learn how to tolerate people. So for now, when I hear people say, "I'm very, very good," or "How are you?" or "I'm very, very happy," I don't have a problem because that is the marker for them. That is who they are. I can say very, the same way I used to have a problem when I used to say, what is the word I'm looking for? When I used to say Ray, and my Spanish friends would be like, "It's not Ray, it's El Rey," because the R in Spanish is rough, so they say El Rey, and I had to practice Rey, the Reina. But turns out, I'm sorry about the noise, there are cars passing. It turns out if you listen to some Mexicans, they actually use the soft R like us, and they will say Rey, mi corazón, whereas here, the farther they are from the States, I'm guessing, we say R, el rey, la reina, things like that, So you get those things, So it really makes you to mark people's identity, and also your own identity, so you can understand better. It has also made me, I think, over the years, speaking with Spanish people here in Ecuador, I've become a better teacher because I've had to think like a Spanish people. I've had to think how to explain certain things, certain ways of thinking in English. I've had to look for ways to say that to them in their own language so that we can flow. For example, I'll give you a good example. In English, I think I said at the beginning, we say, how old are you? In Spanish, the question is, ¿cuánto años tiene? Now, the Spanish speaker knows how is como, old is viejo. So he doesn't really get it why you will say, ¿cuán viejo eres tú? They don't get that aspect, right? And so they're like, pero, ¿por qué? How are you? Es como estás? Y how old are you? Es cuánto años tienen? Do you see how it converts? ¿Cuánto años tienen? How are you? How old are you? ¿Cómo estás? How are you? And both is starting with how, whereas how literally in Espanol is como. And so I have to tell them that we are not asking cuánto años tienes in English when we ask about your age or like that. We're asking how long have you been on the earth, all right? So the concepts differ, and so learning other people's language, in my case, Spanish, has helped me to be able to explain that concept more, especially to my younger students, to say, okay, this is what it means. So when you are thinking, cuando hablamos de la edad, no estamos hablando de tener edad, sino de la viejez o tu tiempo en la tierra. Por eso en inglés decimos, cuán viejo eres or eres, So that is the explanation I make to the kids, when I teach. And that is the advantage of this thing. And it was good for me. I was able to do that simply because I speak French. And in French, we also ask that, how old, how many years have you? Quel âge as-tu? Which doesn't translate word for word actually in Spanish, but it translates, Spanish and Italian have the same thing. ¿Cuántos años tiene? Yeah, it's the same thing in Spanish and Italian, and I think it's the same thing also in Portuguese. So it was thanks to my knowledge of French that I was able to explain that concept in Italian. So at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, it's not about the easiest language, which I now have learned, after deciding to pick another language, I've learned it's not really about how easy a language is, it is the why. The why, which basically translates into every aspect of life. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why do we want to venture into that space or that adventure or that project? So why do you want to learn a language? Is it for work? Is it for school? Or is it just out of passion? I've met people who learn language because, excuse me, some people learn language for love. Most teenagers learn because they want to follow the movies better, for entertainment, which is not bad. So that is the main question. Do you like the language? Does it serve you? Or do you just like it? And if you answer yes to one of those two, then you pick the language immediately. That's what I always tell my students here. Nada es fácil, pero todo es posible. That's just the rule of life. Lo quieres, lo puede. Es todo. All right. So I'll leave you with this. Whatever you want to achieve, go achieve it. It's gonna be hard, but it's doable. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.